Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Indie and Local Authors. This year's Indie Author Day is November 3rd and 4th, but we are celebrating all week. Indie Author Day is a special event for libraries and its readers because it allows us to meet and celebrate the achievements of our local and indie authors. In case you don't know, an indie author is someone who self-publishes in order to reach as many readers as possible and to grow a profitable author publishing business. Today, we have a wonderful panel of indie and local authors to share their experiences as writers. I would like to introduce Kristen Amundson, Casey Cooney, Veronica Lee and Savannah Sergeson, and Lauren Roberts. Welcome and thank you all for being here. So let's kind of start with our first question. This is just a get to know you kind of question. So tell us about you. Who are you? Tell us about your family, interests, career, anything you want to talk about to paint a picture of who you are. So we'll start with you, Kristen.
Thanks so much. And thanks to the library for doing this. And thanks to all of you for joining. A special shout out to my writers group colleagues who are here. We support each other and it's great to see you all. I introduce myself often by saying that I am a former lots of things. I am a former school board member in Fairfax, the former school board chair in Fairfax. I was a former member of the Virginia House of Delegates, where I had George Washington's old seat. I was also the former CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Education. The through line through all of that was that they were all education related in one way or another. And people would say to me, well, gee, how did you plan that career? And I always said, I was just a kindergarten volunteer and things got out of hand. I was, when my daughter was a kindergartner at Bellevue Elementary School, the Fairfax County School Board was going to renovate every school in the district except the one she attended. And I uttered the always dangerous words, somebody ought to do something about that. So I'm sure all of the writers on this panel at least can write the rest of that story. I ended up being very much involved in that process, looked at school board members operating, thought, I bet I could do that. And that was sort of how things happened. So in the course of doing all of that, people kept stopping me and asking me advice on their own kid. And finally, somebody said, gosh, you ought to write a book. So that's the answer to the next question is to talk about the book.
All right, thank you very much. Casey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've lived in Fairfax County most of my life, but early, my father was in the Navy, so we traveled a lot before I really remember. Gave me the idea that I always wanted to go lots of different places and see lots of different things. My father also was a very good communicator. He could speak well, which I can't do, but he taught me to always look words up when you didn't know what they meant and to try to use the right word all the time. But my first exposure to books was after I learned to read in first grade. And I loved them from the minute I started reading. And I knew that was something I wanted to be involved with.
All right, thank you very much. Veronica and Savannah, tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Veronica Lee. I immigrated from Hong Kong to the US when I was 15 years old, and I majored in English at UC Berkeley, and then got a master's in international affairs at Johns Hopkins. I have worked as a journalist for the Asian Wall Street Journal and AFP, which is a French news agency. And then later on, I joined the World Bank and traveled to poor countries to finance development projects. One of my countries was Somalia. And when the country exploded into civil war, I felt I had to write about it. So I retired early from the World Bank and started a writing career. And now I'll let Farah, who is my husband and also co-author of my most recent book, which is a memoir, and it's his memoir. So Fred, want to say a few words about yourself?
I grew up in Iceland and I graduated as an architect from Finland. I pursued an international career that took me to the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and the US. And I've worked for international agencies, both the UNESCO and the World Bank, and which is based in DC. And that is where I met Veronica.
All right, thank you very much. And Lauren, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I describe my childhood as sort of nomadic. I moved all over the place, and until I went to the University of Maryland was when I came to this area for college and ended up going to, staying in the area. I went to American University for grad school, and I studied international relations, international communication, and then promptly became an elementary school teacher. So a little of everything. And I taught for 10 years, and then now I am a recovering elementary school teacher. I live in Herndon. I am married with 3 kids, 1 tween and 2 teenagers. So there's a lot of drama in my house. And I work full time and squeeze in writing whenever no one's looking.
All right, thank you. I felt what you said about recovering elementary school teacher. I was actually a school teacher in the 90s. And after 5 years, I knew right away that that was not going to be my life's career.
When you know you're done, you're done.
You're done.
You know.
You know. And I was a school librarian for 8 years. And then I realized that that was not the career I wanted to have for the rest of my working life. So yes, absolutely. The one thing I was sharing earlier with our authors is that I noticed that there's a common thread where everybody had a prior career before becoming writers. And I think it's really interesting how there are so many different pathways into this kind of career of being an author. So thank you for sharing your experiences and your background. So now let's talk a little bit about your books. So Kristen, we'll start with you. Tell us about your book or books and any inspirations behind them.
Sure. When you are particularly a local elected official, people know exactly who you are. And in the olden days before Instacart, I always knew if there was a problem in the schools because it would take me 45 minutes to get out of the produce section at the Safeway because everybody wanted to talk to me about the 4th grade math curriculum. Over the years, I was stopped and asked questions in the grocery store and on the sidelines at the soccer game. And once, as God is my witness, when I was standing in the communion line in church. And at that point, I said, I am trying to approach the throne of grace here. No, I will not talk to you about swim and dive budget. But in the course of that, what I realized is what we all know, which is that being a parent is fraught and hard. And being a parent with kids in school is fraughter and harder. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to figure out whether you should redshirt your kid and enroll them in kindergarten a year late, or how you're going to possibly help them write the college essay that they need to get into a school. All along the way, there are a billion questions. And honestly, schools aren't always as helpful as they could be. So the book that I wrote is called, I don't know, there we go. 81 questions for parents, helping your kids succeed in school. And it just takes kids from, as I say, that decision, what do they really need to know when they go to kindergarten, all the way through actually that first year right out of high school. You know, what if my kid doesn't want to go to college? What if my kid wants to go into a trade? All of those things. And it combines research, lots and lots and lots of personal stories. How I mostly write is I call up smart people and ask them what they think. And in this case, the smart people were parents. And then tried to put it down in a way that was kind of engaging and entertaining. So that's the book.
All right, thank you. Casey, tell us a little bit about your books and any inspiration.
Well, I have two books, but I'm just going to talk about the one, Seeking Solace, which is the first one I wrote and my favorite. I did want to add a comment, what you were saying about everybody doing something else before they started writing. When I was first joined a writers group, one of the very young people in my group said, "You're so lucky to have all that experience to write about." So there you go. This story, Seeking Solace, came out of what I'll call personal fantasy about moving away to someplace I've never been, and where I don't know anybody. And it just kind of then flowed beyond that into what it is, a story about a young woman who has to recover from things that she didn't even realize were her problems. And I wrote some notes, I'm not sticking to them. So she goes about it in a very sensible way, but then she kind of blows it all apart and just ends up making her own safety net, though that was not an intention.
All right, thank you. All right, Veronica and Surrey, tell us about your book.
Well, I love to tell stories.
Okay, this is our book, Viking Voyager, an Icelandic memoir. And this is a picture of southern Iceland.
Okay, so I love to stories about my travels. So, well, I guess when my friends became tired of listening to my stories, they said, why don't you write about it so we can read about it? So I started jotting down memorable events and sort them in a folder called episodes. It's sort of like dumping photos into a shoebox and then forget about it. And then I showed a few snippets to Veronica, and she had by then published a few books of herself. And instead of patting me on the back and saying, great job and go on, she actually became interested and started helping me write the book.
Well, I was going to just pat him on the back and just tell him, go on, you know, this is during his retirement. He needs to do something. But then after reading about 10 pages or so, I said to him, Sarah, you really had an interesting life. You know, I have heard stories about his travels before, but then I didn't appreciate how extreme they were until he connected the dots for me. And also around that time, Iceland was all the rage. It still is. Everybody is talking about going to Iceland. So I decided to help him turn his episodes into a book. And it is called Viking Voyager, an Icelandic memoir. It weaves together his upbringing in Iceland, his Viking heritage, and his travels around the world working as an architect.
By the way, working in the field of education, I hear everybody start saying that. So
he was building schools in
schools.
Africa and other
Oh, that's
countries.
wonderful.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Lauren, tell us about your books and any inspirations behind them.
Okay. Well, I write fiction and I have one, I call it a suspenseful rom-com, which let's see if I can get the cover to show. Almost. Come on. It does not want to do it. It just wants to blur it out. Anyway, oh, I almost had it.
There you go.
You can kind of see it. Anyway, it is about a young woman who is paying for her mom's chemotherapy treatments by working as an assassin. And then all of a sudden, she's been doing this for a couple of years. Everything's as good as it can be. And then her next assignment at the beginning of the book is to kill her celebrity crush, who that's a little inconvenient, and it's sort of the tipping point for her, and that's when it gets complicated. So it's just, and it's I call it the most lighthearted book you could probably read about an assassin, because it actually is a rom-com, and it's funny, and it doesn't sound like it might be funny, but it is. And so then I wrote another one that is, it's not as funny, it's more of a romantic suspense, and this probably won't show either. It's a really nice cover, I swear. You almost get it, and then it goes away. Now, anyway, it's called The Breadcrumb Game. And that one is about a timid interior designer who one day, out of nowhere, someone blows up her house. So she's forced to partner with the world's grumpiest FBI agent and his team, and they go on a cross-country chase to find out three things: why someone blew up her house, who is trying to kill her, and how her estranged sister is connected to it all.
And what were the inspirations behind these two books?
The first one, actually, I was just writing a lot of I was writing for fun. I wasn't writing a book. I was just sort of writing, and I was spending a lot of time doing it. And my husband said, "Okay, you need to do something with this. Come on, how can we do something? How can you monetize this somehow? You know, make this do something." And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know anything I want to write a book about." And so my husband actually came up with the plot of the first one. And then the second one, we said, okay, well, assassins were kind of working, and, you know, like a romance angle, it was kind of working the first time. So what, and so he kind of brainstormed it with me the second one. And, but I was a little better at, you know, okay, now I think I've got this going. And, for the third one, I have drafted a third one, and it's sort of the same sort of, you know, romance assassins kind of thing. And he didn't even know what it was about until he read the ninth draft or something. So now I've gotten the training wheels off. I can plot them on my own now.
Wow, thank you very much for that. All right, here comes my favorite part in our discussion. We're going to have our authors read excerpts from their books. So we'll start with you, Kristen.
Thanks so much. You know, parent involvement in their child's education is a good thing, but like all good things, you can sometimes have too much of it. And so one of the questions in the book is, how much parent involvement is too much? As an elected official, I was sometimes called on to judge elementary school science fairs. It was always fun to see the experiments that kids had designed to answer questions that might have been puzzling them. What does happen when a volcano erupts? Can plants live without light? And of course, there were a few projects that you were pretty sure had not been completed entirely by the child whose name was on the label. That was certainly the case with the scale model of a nuclear reactor purportedly constructed by a first grader. As far back as 1990, researchers Foster Klein and Jim Fay coined the term helicopter parents to describe the parents who hover over their child and their child's teacher. Today, they sometimes also are called snowplow parents and even bulldozer parents. They don't just supervise the homework, they write it. They don't just get to know the child's teacher. They come in and argue every time their child earns anything less than an A. You might be familiar with the story of the most famous or infamous helicopter parents, the more than 50 wealthy parents who were caught in that scandal called the Varsity Blues, where they paid six-figure bribes to college coaches and photoshopped their kids into photographs, all to get them admitted to, frankly, schools that I didn't think were all that hot, but there you have it. But they were not the first parents who were a little too involved with their child's education. Mary Pinckney Hardy MacArthur, the mother of General Douglas MacArthur, apparently moved to West Point when her son enrolled there. She lived nearby and supervised everything he did, sometimes through binoculars, to ensure he graduated first in his class. And if you don't think that's at least a little creepy, can I just tell you that this book is probably not for you? Do teachers know what's going on? Of course they do, but there always isn't much they can do. As Julie Lithcott-Haynes, who spent more than a decade as the freshman dean at Stanford, once observed, it turns out that it is very hard for all but the most seasoned of teachers to stand up to a well-heeled parent wielding a glue gun. How can you tell if you're a helicopter parent? If you use the first person plural when discussing your child's projects, as in, we have that diorama to finish this weekend, you're a helicopter parent. If you make an average of 3 trips a school, extra trips a week to drop off things your child forgot, you're a helicopter parent with bulldozer tendencies. And if your child's kindergarten science project was a model nuclear reactor, I would not have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. You've crossed into the realm of the bulldozer parent.
Thank you. I have a few of my own stories
We
about
all do.
helicopter parents.
I saw a lot of nods.
I think it may even be worse nowadays.
It just gets worse.
It's worse and worse. You want to help, but I think we're hindering and not helping. Thank you so much for that, Kristen. All right, Casey, please read your excerpt.
Thanks. Well, since everybody was showing their covers, I thought I would do that real quick before I started for my 2 books. And here we go. My character, Solace Murphy, is at a picnic just before the Marines are leaving to go to the Desert Storm War. We return to my blanket. Mike stretched out, looking ready for a nap, but still feeling talkative. I can't help but wonder about you, Solace, he said slowly, thinking out loud. The better I get to know you, the less you match up with the girl that crossed the equator for no good reason. You're so sensible and timid, yet here you are, doing this fantastic thing. I sat on the edge of my blanket, silently smoothing the sand in front of me with my feet. I was glad he had not asked me a question, though I suspected he expected some kind of response. My eyes on my feet. I waited for him to say more. Perhaps he would even change the subject. I never liked talking about myself. Did your folks approve of your marriage? That was hardly the subject change I had hoped for. They said they didn't. Now you mean. Right, now. I don't remember them trying to stop me. So what happened? I grew up and he grew down. I saw Mike redden and smirk. It's okay. It just means he tried to pull me down with him. I looked up again and I saw that I could trust Mike. He wouldn't use my weaknesses against me. He brought out the worst in me. Why did you let that happen? How do you stop it from happening? I saw that he really didn't understand. I don't remember why I wanted to be with him at the beginning, but I did. When we were together for so long, I thought we were meant to share our lives. I guess I was just trusting, or I didn't know that love could be better or should be better. But as time went on, I realized that in his mind, every problem was caused by someone other than himself. Nothing was ever his fault. And I guess I was pretty stupid because it took me almost 4 years to see that I had married someone who wanted to be something so useless. Did that son of a hurt you? Well, he never hit me or anything like that, I hedged. Suddenly, I was thrust back in time to our honeymoon. I was floating at the motel swimming pool, tired from the activities of recent days, and by swimming some uncounted number of laps. He didn't like to swim, and the last time I'd seen him, he was reading a magazine. I had no idea he'd entered the water when, without warning, he lifted my ankles into the air, sending my head down under the water. I struggled to kick myself free. I backed away from him, still wild with terror and coughing water. He cradled his arm and yelled that I was impossible to please. I had apologized to him later. Even now, knowing how he had treated me later, I still discounted the possibility that he intended me harm. Mike must have read something on my face. Mother Blank ate away at your spirit. My head spun around to meet his eyes. His assessment was too accurate to deny. He sat up, scooted forward to sit beside me, put his hand over mine reassuringly. So you really needed to get away from home. I nodded. I like to think that I came here with some grand personal goals, but I wasn't doing very well back home. I'd become way too dependent on my parents. I've got to do some soul searching and figure out what I want out of life. Seeking solace, eh? Let me know when you find it.
Wow, thank you very much, Casey. What was the name of the book that you read from?
It's called Seeking Solace.
Seeking Solace. All right, thank you very much. All right, Veronica and Savannah.
Okay, let me set the scene before I actually read from the book, which I think I showed before. I am 19 years old. I am leaving my home country, Iceland, for the first time ever. I just finished high school, and I'm going to study in Finland. And I'm on a plane which is 2 hours late in starting. My fear came true. I missed my flight in Copenhagen. I nervously approached an SAS staff, and to my relief, she understood my textbook Danish. My best high school scores had always been in Danish, but I had never used it on a real Dane before. Without ado, the attendant put me and my cardboard suitcase on a plane bound for Stockholm with a connection to Finland. Communicating in Swedish in Stockholm was a bit more demanding because I had never taken lessons in the language. I had only picked it up studying physics from a Swedish textbook. But in the end, it worked just fine. With a ticket to Helsinki in hand, my spirits were soaring again. Until I settled in my seat on the Finnair plane. Suddenly, I felt truly alone. Everyone around me was speaking a language that sounded like gibberish to me. I couldn't pick up even a prefix or suffix that shared a common root with any language I had previously encountered. Even the dress code of the passengers seemed alien. The women were draped in long, colorful skirts, and the men sported flamboyant vests and jackets. I had no idea that they were gypsies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Lauren.
All right, this is from my second book, the one about where Ella's house blows up. It was a day like all the others. Ella woke up early and listened to the news anchors dissect the evils of the world until she had enough, then turned her thoughts to work. The morning flew by as it usually did. She would have worked through lunch again, but for once, her stomach rumbled a reminder. She reheated the leftover Chinese food from the night before and ate it in front of her laptop. Work-life balance wasn't really her thing, but that was okay with her. She loved her job. The distant screech of the post office truck broke her concentration mid-afternoon, as it so often did, letting her know she'd been absorbed in her work for hours. Sheila, her mail carrier, was nearly 10 minutes off schedule that day, but that was still within her normal window. Ella pushed her chair back and stood. Two birds chirped greetings to each other outside her kitchen window, alternating their songs as if in conversation. The wind chimes that had been a souvenir from a trip to Hawaii filled the air with gentle music. Today, Ella was expecting a large check from an eccentric client who insisted on sending her payment via the post office, rather than electronic transfer, so she was eager for the mail to come. Once that money arrived, she'd start planning a trip to Bermuda for next Christmas. Sheila was gone by the time Ella walked out the front door. She picked up a small box from her doorstep with a printed label addressed to her, but no return address or postage. She knew who it was from, so she didn't bother to open it yet. Continuing on to the mailbox with the box in her hand, She waved to her elderly neighbor, Miss Rosa, and her daughter Celeste in their driveway across the street. Celeste's car had turned the corner at the end of the block, and Miss Rosa disappeared back inside her house. Ella scanned the otherwise quiet, tree-lined street fondly. Except for the 4 years she'd lived in a college dorm, this house had been her home all her life. She tugged the mailbox door open and was surprised to find it empty. That's weird. I know I heard the mail truck. She reached in to see if Sheila had pushed the mail to the back. Her hand was only halfway in the mailbox when the ground rumbled under her feet and a blast of hot, smoky air flung her backwards like a rag doll and slammed her against the pavement.
Wow, thank you very much.
You can figure out what happened.
Yeah.
You already told us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, I'm looking at our participants and I see Nick, one of our writers who is on our panel. I'm gonna go ahead and make Nick part of our group. Nick, I hope you are able, we're halfway through, unfortunately, but I hope that you can just briefly talk about who you are and a book, and then go ahead and read your excerpt from your book. So let me go ahead and make you co-host so you can now unmute yourself, and welcome. So we need you to unmute yourself, because we can't hear you, Nick. We're having some technical difficulties, so sorry about that. Nick, we can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself. All right, I think you're unmuted. You want to say a few words? Okay, now I think Nick is frozen. Poor Nick, I'm so sorry. All right, so we'll get that figured out, but we'll go ahead and go to our next question for the panel. What motivates your writing practices? What would you say is your interesting writing quirk? So Kristen, we'll start with you.
I am the world's worst procrastinator. And so what motivates my writing practice is that I engage in avoidance behaviors as long as I can, and then finally the guilt takes over, is what I would say. Every day I think, boy, 10 o'clock, I'm going to start writing at 10 o'clock, and it's usually much closer to 11:30. And the way that I write is, as Anne Lamott says, I have really awful, crappy, she says shitty first drafts. And the thing that I have to accept is that the first draft is just going to be dreadful. And the second thing that I would say is that when I'm done, I usually whine for quite a while. And then very often my daughter will say, oh, for heaven's sakes, Mom, just sit down and keep writing. And so that's about it. I wish there were magic words or secret behaviors. There aren't. But that's what I do.
All right, thank you very much. And Casey, please answer the question.
Well, basically, I do it because I love to do it. And if I don't do it, I don't feel good. So it's sort of an addiction in a way. I love thinking about it. And I get so caught up sometimes, actually will create too much story, too many characters, and then I have to weed it back down. Because creating characters is my favorite part. And but then once I usually write in first person, so once I hit it right, it's kind of like acting. I'm in character when I write stories. So I'm very involved in the scene and what's happening around me. And so then I have to remember when I go back over it later, what I saw when I was writing the first draft or the third draft or whatever, and add in all those other details.
All right, thank you. All right, Veronica and Saveri, what motivates your writing practices, and do you have an interesting writing quirk that you would like to share?
Well, I like to write in the morning when my mind is fresh. And I also like to make my atmosphere as pleasant as possible. So I would have a cup of tea, a cookie, and sometimes a scented candle to make it, as party-like a mood as possible. Because writing is hard. You have to make it as stress-free as you can. But why do I keep on doing it if it's so hard? That's because the satisfaction I get is enormous. It's more than anything else I do. So I just keep on doing it. But the best time I find for my writing is when I'm walking, when I'm going for a walk, and I'm thinking about what I wrote in the morning, and then planning what to write the next morning.
Unlike Veronica, I'm a very undisciplined writer. I write when I feel like it, and when I don't, I just don't do anything, or I start doing a construction project or whatever else I'm interested in at that particular time.
Until I bug him.
And she does.
All right, thank you very much. And Lauren.
I related a lot to what Casey said. I write because I love to do it. And I see a lot of writers that I follow online who have these little motivational charts for themselves, and they write so much and then they color in the thing. And I'm like, no, I bribe myself to do other things with, like, if I finish that, then I get to write if the time allows. But it's like the opposite for me. I can make myself do other things by telling myself I can write. I would say a writing quirk of mine is I've noticed that I write best when it's either silent or like a lot of background noise, like in a coffee shop or something where there's lots of people and it's noisy. But if I'm at home and it's just like a few people, like my family talking, that's distracting to me. I can't do that. But that could also be because half the time they're talking to me. So, mommy, mommy, mommy.
Especially when you're busy doing other things. That's when they're very needy, I have discovered.
Yes, of course, of course.
All right. Nick, are you able to get your audio working? You want to say a few words and see if we can hear you? Oh, I'm so sorry. We still can't. I wish we could figure out what the problem is. So we'll go ahead and go to our next question. What was one of the most unexpected things you learned in creating your books? So we'll start with you, Kristen.
The most unexpected thing, or at least the most profound thing, is something that I learned in writing my second book, which I'm also going to be brave enough to try to hold up here, called Unfinished Learning, Parents, Schools, and the COVID School Closures. I was talking to parents, and I knew that what was going on during COVID when kids were home was just really, really incredibly hard. And so I pitched to my publisher that I could write a book about it, and we set a sort of impossible deadline. In case you're wondering how I actually get through the procrastination, there's nothing like an impossible deadline staring you in the face to motivate you to put your butt in the chair. And I wrote that book the same way that I write other books, write anything that I write, which was I called people up, and I called parents all over the country and said, tell me what's going on in your life. And they told me stories, and nearly all of them were sad. But the saddest stories were the stories of parents of kids with disabilities. And when they started talking about what happened to kids with disabilities during the pandemic, they would cry. I would cry. And it was just and you can tell in the book, it's almost painful to read it. And I think that has been what has motivated me. And I now, when people are saying, oh, the pandemic's over, it's all good, I can't get those stories out of my mind. So that for me has been the most profound experience.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Casey, what's one of the most unexpected things you learned in creating your books?
I think it comes down to just, it was really hard to let it go once it was done, and deciding when it was done was very difficult. And that's what I discovered, was how hard it is to say, I wrote the first draft, and I cut it way back because I wrote it too long. I like long books. And then every update, every draft after that, things got better and better, and it's like, so when is the point to stop? It's very hard to know, when am I making a change that's making it worse, not better? And then saying goodbye to the characters. And people say, oh, just write a sequel. I'll just write one book that tells one story. And so I guess that was it, just figuring out when it was time to stop and say goodbye.
Yeah, because you live with these characters for so many months or years. I would imagine it would be difficult to say goodbye. Thank you for that. Veronica and Nteireho?
Well, my first book was a spy thriller set in Somalia.
Ooh.
The country I worked in and what happened there inspired me to start writing. At that time, I had an agent, and she had spent 2 years trying to market my book and got nowhere. I didn't know what to do next. And then a friend told me there was a new technology called print on demand. It was in 1999. So I contacted a company called First Books. And within a few months, I was holding my book in my hand. Actually, the First Books is now called Author House. So that was a really unexpected event. So the first breakthrough was very important. And when I contacted a small press for my second book, which is a memoir about my mother's life. This is my mom. Isn't she beautiful? This is a story about how she brought the family to the US. So I found a small press and contacted them and showed him the manuscript. And at the same time, I also told him I have a first book, and I told him about my sales from that first book. And then he was convinced. So he took me on. So my second book, my mother's memoir, was printed by a small press.
All right, thank you. And Savannah, do you want to talk about anything unexpected that you learned during creating your memoir? It's your life, so I don't know if anything was really unexpected.
Well, what actually surprised me in this process was, number one, that there was a company interested in my story here in America. That was sort of a joint venture. And then I translated the book into Icelandic and showed it to sort of a standard publishing company in Iceland, and the guy said, I will take it on, and they published it. So that took me by surprise.
All right, thank you. All right, and Lauren, anything unexpected that you learned in creating your books?
I think the biggest thing was that I could put like little bits of myself into the characters, and it helped me relate to them. And but it also helped me just in general, because when I started writing, my kids were very little and I was working from home. We had just moved. I didn't know anyone in my neighborhood. I was going a little bit out of my mind because I just had no outlet. So writing originally was my outlet, and I found that if I put little bits of myself into my characters, it helped me work these things out. So, and it has continued to do that, which I think was the biggest surprise for me.
Now, does your husband read your books and say, "Oh, that's you, right? I noticed that characteristic or that behavior"? Does he do that?
Yeah, he recognizes some of it, but I think there's some other ones that are a little bit more subtle. So I don't think he notices all of it.
All right. Thank you. Nick, are you able to join us via audio? Nick, if you look in chat, I put a phone number that you can call and you can join us over the phone. So that may be another way that we can make sure you participate. All right, so look in chat.
You can also try to hit Alt-A on your keyboard and see what happens. Alt-A.
Thank you. All right, it is 1:47, so we have a little over 10 minutes remaining. If you have any questions for our authors, please put those in chat, or you may raise your hand during the Q&A and I will invite you to unmute. All right, so what are the challenges of being a writer? So Kristen, we'll start with you.
Well, and I think we've all said this, it's a lonely occupation, and there's just no way around it. And so I think finding ways to build community is just such an important part of being a writer. And again, as I say, my own writers group here has just been enormously helpful in that process. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And then the other challenge is page proofs, but we can go through that another time.
I'm sorry, what are page proofs?
Page proofs are when you think it's done. You get the copy of what it is supposed to exactly look like. And that is the point at which making changes starts to get your publisher or upset, because it starts to cost them money. And you just inevitably find things that you had edited it, you had, in my case, I had an editor, and still I found things that were just awful. And then somehow or another, the typesetter had not matched up the end notes with the actual text. So nothing matched up. And that was a process that, drove me just about around the bend. And at one point I finally just said, I don't even care if this thing you have a reference or not. You don't seem to be able to get the correct reference. So that part of the process, there's always a part of every job that is a kind of a pain in the neck. And for me, it is the page proof process, because that's what goes on the press and that's what everybody's going to see. So those are the two things for me.
Thank you. Casey, what are the challenges of writing?
Well, I disagree that I don't think writing is a lonely profession, but it does work well for introverts. The thing that's most challenging is being able to find the time that I want and need to be able to do it. Since it's more of you might call it a hobby in some sense, because it's not making money. It would be nice if it did. I always sort of feel like other things are a priority over it. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is just allowing myself to go ahead and spend my time writing rather than doing other things that might be seen as more important by most people.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I hope we have time to talk about this. I think with indie writers, one of the challenges is making their profession profitable. And to me, that would be a definite challenge. I mean, I think we all realize that we probably won't be Stephen King, but what can you do so you can kind of be compensated for the time and effort you spend writing your books? I would look at that as a definite challenge. Yeah. All right, Veronica and Savannah, what are the challenges of being a writer?
Well, there's one attribute I think every writer needs, and some are born with it and some have to acquire it. This attribute is sometimes called perseverance, but I call it obsession. I have published 4 books, and on average, it takes me 5 years to get a book out there. The writing and rewriting, getting feedback from editors, agents, and other authors, and so on. And finally, the publishing process itself. Every step takes a long time. So you have to be obsessed to want to stay with it.
Really think about that. When you think about it, you know, when we have jobs, we have tasks, and it's either 3 months, a month, a week, a year. But writing is years. That's a task of years. That's a long time. That's a great way to say that we need perseverance. I didn't think about it like that, Veronica. Wow.
It's really upsetting.
It has to be if you're in it for that length of time. And Savannah, any challenges of writing your first memoir?
Okay. The thing about my job, Veronica had been writing for years, and I basically think of her, she is the writer in the family, and I'm sort of an appendix. But the nice thing about when we started working together on my book, we actually worked very nicely together because we are completely opposite people. She is a person people, and I'm a thing people. I think about, I mean, I built my own house and I repaired cars once upon a time. She understands people. And so she is good at describing relationship and emotions, while I am into physical structures and mechanics. So we have each other's strengths and weaknesses, and in the writing process, it turned out to be a very good combination.
All right, thank you. And Lauren, any challenges?
I agree with Casey completely. For me, it's all about time because I work full time and I have 3 kids and so many things that require my attention and my time. So I have to fight to keep the time to write available to me because otherwise it could easily just be taken up with other things.
All right, thank you. All right, so our next question is, what's next? What's next for you as a writer? Are you working on anything now? Kristen.
So 81 Questions is being reissued as a paperback. And so I am gonna spend some time in the coming year really getting out and promoting it. I did a little book tour the first time it came out. I'm going to try to set up another little book tour and some speaking engagements, because one of the things that really energizes me is having a chance to talk to parents with kids in school and hearing their stories. So that's certainly a goal. I'm thinking about the next book, which might possibly be 81 More Questions. The number 81 was just the publisher and I had to have a title, and what I wanted to call it was Band Can Get Your Kid into Harvard and Other School Secrets Parents Need to Know, but the publisher thought that the title was too long. So we decided numbers sell books, people like numbers, and we picked 81 just because it sounded big and kind of but not like 100. So we did that. And then in the end, I ended up with 83 questions, but by then the cover was designed, so I had to combine some of them. But 81 seems to be my number now. And I think that may be the next thing, is to continue the story, continue to talk to parents, continue to tell their story, and continue to share educational research and what we know about schools with parents.
Especially now post-pandemic, I
It
think a
just
lot of things are
continues to be
changing.
hard. It
Yeah,
just continues to be hard.
yeah. Thank you, Kristen. Casey, what's next? What are you working on?
I'm working on a story. I've had a little trouble figuring out whose perspective to tell it from, but it takes place in a small town on the coast during World War II, I think. And either that or it'll be modern, and we'll be trying to revive the economy of the small town that almost died. And hopefully getting more opportunities like this to talk about my book.
All right, thank you. All right, Veronica and Nteireho, what's next? What's going on?
Nteireho and I had so much fun writing his memoir that we decided to do something together again. This will be a historical fiction set in the 1850s in America.
Oh, neat.
I chose this period because this was when the first Chinese immigrants came to America. And at the same time, it was also when the first Icelandic immigrants came to America. So our interests converge here.
Wow, that is incredible. Thank you for that. All right, and Lauren, what's going on?
All right. Well, I originally published my first book through a hybrid publisher almost 2 years ago, and I'm getting my rights back to that book at the end of January, Gemini Divided. So yeah, so I get to self-publish that one after that. And my second book, The Breadcrumb Game, is going to the editor in the next month or two. So I'm hoping to have that one published, March, April in there. And I am also drafting a second book in the Gemini Divided series right now, when I have the time to write. So that's exciting because I get to use one of my secondary characters from Gemini Divided as the main character this time. So it's like I just started writing it and I already knew her, and I didn't have to get to know her this time. So that was has been kind of.
All right, thank you. That's very exciting. All right, it's almost time for a Q&A portion, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question. How can people buy your books? So Kristen, we'll start with you.
Well, a couple of ways. It's on Amazon under my name. It is also available through the publisher Rowman and Littlefield, who are an education publishing house. And then if you just Google 81 Questions for Parents, a number of local bookstores have carried it and make it available that way. And of course, I'm always a big fan of supporting local independent bookstores.
All right, thank you. And Casey, how can people buy your book?
The books are both on paper and electronically available on Amazon. There is a link on my website, caseycooneyauthor.com. And so either way.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind putting into chat your URLs to your websites, and we'll include it in the video description when we upload the event to YouTube. All right, Veronica and Nteireho, how can people buy your books?
We have a website called veronicalee.com. And you can get my paperbacks there, including our jointly written one. And for ebooks, the best place is Amazon. And I just want to mention another book that I haven't mentioned before. This is called Confucius Says, which is a novel about caregiving for elderly parents.
It's actually a thinly disguised
Memoir.
memoir or her taking care of her parents.
Yeah, we did that together. He was a great help.
Yeah, taking care of other people, being a caregiver is extremely difficult. And I don't think people really understand it until they're in that position. I had to take care of my dad. So I have a profound respect for caregivers. It's hard work. It's very hard, but we do it because we love our family. All right, Lauren, how can people buy your books?
Well, there are, I think, 5 or 6 different bookstores in the area that carry it on the shelf. And I also have a list on my website of a lot of the major online merchants that have it also.
All right, thank you.
Oh, can I say one more thing? We have
Absolutely.
book signing at Barnes and Nobles in Manassas on November 12th.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna look in chat. I did see a question. We have Sarah asking, what advice do you have to all people who want to start writing? So we can go in order, or if you just want to share, well, maybe I'll just call on people randomly. So Lauren, you've always been last, so we'll start with you first. So what advice do you have to all people who
Right.
want to start writing?
I would say write what makes you happy, what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, because that will, I mean, ultimately that will be the most successful and it will make you happy.
Thank you. Veronica and Savannah.
Yeah, I agree. Write about, write what you're passionate about. You have to be passionate about it. And I am a great believer in outline. Although by the end of the story, my writing will have nothing to do with the outline. It will be completely different. But once you have an outline, that means you think you know what you want to say, and you put it down step by step, and then you write according to that order. But somewhere along the line, I would discover that what I want to say is actually quite different than what I thought I wanted to say. But the outline is a good way to keep myself on track and to know what to look forward to. I think it's important to know what you're going to do the next time you sit down and write.
In my case, it was the total opposite, I would say. It was basically, as I went through my life, sort of writing little essays or something of that nature, and just, as I said, dumping them into a shoebox. And then at a much later date, sort of having a second look at this and trying to reorganize it and saying, is there a story here? And if so, how can that story begin, have a middle and an end?
Thank you. Casey, what advice do you have to people wanting to write?
I give this advice also to some of the young people I work with. Don't worry about the first sentence. Start with the second. And that could be the second chapter, not the first chapter. We tend to rewrite the beginning, but all the stuff in the middle is what holds it together. So if you don't know how you want to start in the middle somewhere, and it works for Sphere.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Casey and Kristen. What advice?
Yeah, Casey, I totally agree. I think starting somewhere other than the beginning, and because you just sort of clear your throat for the first several times you write the beginning, I think. I would say remember that writing is a craft, and like any craft, it gets better with practice. And so find any opportunity that you can to get your work out into the world. And that may be blogs. I remember that the person who wrote 50 Shades, I think, and is now a bajillionaire, started by writing on websites for fan fiction. I think the Twilight series, if I'm right. So it sort of doesn't matter. You really learn to write by writing. And so write wherever you can and get it out into the world, and you'll start to get better.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions from our guests? You can put it in chat or raise your hand and I'll invite you to unmute. All right, well, I do have a question I asked one of our panel discussions this week, and it was about feedback, about when you get reviews of your books, how do you handle the negative criticism or the negative feedback that you get? How do you handle that? How do you process it? How do you deal with that? Because another writer talked about that when you write, you're exposing yourself, you're opening yourself up, you're making yourself vulnerable to people that don't know you. So how do you handle negative feedback? So Lauren, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, sometimes it stings and you have to sort of step back and go, ooh, okay. But I just remind myself that, you know, every book is not for every person. I consider myself to be pretty picky about what I like to read. So if I don't like to read everything, then, you know, why should anyone else? And when someone, I mean, I have gotten some negative reviews and I just say, well, that book wasn't for them. I don't know why they kept reading it. They probably should have stopped a little sooner. But, you know, it is what it is.
Thank you. Veronica Severi, would you like to answer the question?
Well, writing memoirs is pretty dicey because you are talking about real people. And I wrote my mother's memoir, and she was very critical of my dad. So what I did was something very diplomatic in my family. I know who the power is. The power is my big sister. In a Chinese family, the hierarchy is very important. So my eldest sister, I consulted her every step of the way, and I would send her drafts for her to read. So in the end, when it came out, of course, you know, she loved it because she helped me write it. And all the other siblings kind of fell into line. They didn't dare complain.
In my case, the negative feedback came actually from my former sister-in-law, who was upset about the way I had depicted her and, of course, her sister's family. And I thought this was all based on stories that I had heard from the sister, my ex. But apparently, in the process of writing it down and publishing it, I was inadvertently exposing family secrets. And that took me back. I apologized to my sister-in-law, my former sister-in-law, for that if it hurt, but it was not intentional, and we basically have left it at that.
Yeah, he should have mentioned the source of his information.
I didn't think about that, writing memoirs, when you're writing about real people that are still living, that can be tricky. Yeah, that can be tricky. Casey.
Yeah, with fiction. My biggest problem really is not getting enough feedback. I do find more than anything that the most of the feedback that I've gotten is through my writers group, and that's the source that I usually give people feedback. Having people read the book the first time before it's published, and it is hard. I'm very sensitive, and so I do have to remind myself that there are plenty of bestsellers out there that are absolutely garbage. So that's a reassuring thought, I guess, you know, that somebody doesn't like my masterpiece is probably buying that garbage that the well-known author wrote. So it makes you feel better temporarily anyway to make up those kinds of thoughts.
I was looking at some Stephen King books, so I used my Audible credits for, because I was looking for an audio book, and I always look at the reviews. And yes, Stephen King, he has his share of negative reviews for his book. So that's one way to look at it, Casey. No one is No one escapes that.
He has lots of reviews, though, I bet. That would be
Lots of
nice to
reviews.
have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there were lots of reviews, yes.
Yeah.
All right. And Kristen.
Well, as a writer, because I tell stories about parents and families, I have adopted a practice that when Jay Matthews was writing for the Washington Post, he used to use with all of the people he interviewed. And it's pretty controversial in journalism, in the journalism world. But I send them exactly what I'm going to say and let them have a chance to look at it and react to it. And there have been cases when I just got stuff wrong and I've made the change. And in the case of the book on the pandemic, I made the decision not to use the names of kids. I just would say the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, on the theory that sometime in their life, they're going to encounter a mean girl, and being readily available on Google with a story of how they really stunk at math in the 6th grade just struck me as maybe more angst and agita than I wanted to put on that kid, you know? So that's the first thing. But the second, when it's about your own work, I got to say 20 years in politics does, if not make it easier, at least prepare you for it. And it's just really hard. I agree with Casey. It just stinks. It's hard.
Thank you. I'm going to squeeze in just one last question before we end our discussion today. We talked about, someone, I can't remember who, mentioned how you're not compensated probably the way you need to be when you publish your books. How do you market your books? How do you publicize yourselves? How do you try to get your book out to as many readers as possible? So, Lauren, we'll start with you.
I mean, I'm always looking for ways to get my books out there. I post on social media, on Instagram and Facebook regularly. I use a website called Book Sweeps to do promos. I have tried ads, not so successfully. I need to learn more about them to get them right. And I'm always looking for in-person events. So I feel like any opportunity that's out there that I see, I try to grab it.
Thank you. Veronica and Nteireho.
You may want to look into a place called Northern Virginia Writers Club. They organize book signing and marketing events, and I have joined them several times and sold a number of books with them. But in general, I'm finding it more difficult. You know, I started back in 2000, and it was so much easier at that time. I go on social media, post on several sites, you know, this is my book, da-da-da-da, and then I would get hits. I would see it in my Amazon account. But nowadays, I think everybody's writing, which is good, but which means it's harder for yours to stand out. And in the past, I've had a lot of invitations to book clubs and, you know, all kinds of retiree groups and social clubs. But ever since COVID, that market has shrunk because people got used to Zooming. They think, oh, it's really convenient to Zoom. So I would do things on Zoom, but which means I'm not physically there to do book signing.
In my case, I have followed, of course, Veronica's lead in this, but it has been fairly obvious for me to identify especially the Icelandic diaspora in the United States, which is mainly in the northern states of the U.S. and in Canada. And we had the lucky opportunity to actually address a big gathering in Banff last spring, which was great for two reasons. Banff is a great place to visit, and we met a lot of people, including my long lost cousin. We figured out that we were both descendants from people who had emigrated in the 1870s. So that was kind of fun.
Right, thank you. And Casey.
I don't do a very good job of it. I am on social media. I have a website. I try to put myself out there when I can. I'm not a very outgoing person. So it's really hard. I'd much rather write than talk about it. So but I'm hoping I'm learning to do it better.
Thank you. And Kristen.
Yeah, I just, it is at a certain point you feel like, am I going to write another book or am I going to promote the one I got? And because it's just a zero-sum game. I'm gonna, again, the reissuing 81 questions in paperback is, I hope, going to give me a chance for a do-over, because I feel like there are things I could have done better. What I know about people who are successful in promoting their work on social media is that they do it all the time. One post a day is like, isn't that cute? So, if I'm going to do social media, yeah, right. Yeah. If I'm going to do social media, I'm going to have to really do it. And so I'm just kind of trying to sketch that all out now. The book will be out sometime this month, so I've got a little time, but that's it. Anyway, thanks again to the library for doing this. And I loved meeting all these authors, and I'm looking forward to reading your books.
All right. On that note, Kristen, that's a nice transition to including our program. This has been delightful. I can't believe it's been an hour and 15 minutes. I really can't. The time zoomed, pun intended, very quickly. Thank you all for being part of our panel. Nick, I am so sorry we couldn't work out the audio problems. It would have been a delight to hear your stories as well. Everyone in our audience, thank you for being here. Expect a link to this presentation in the next 1 to 2 weeks. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye.
Thank you.